Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to share with you a truth buried deep within the wisdom of the ancients. A truth that has the power to shatter the invisible chains of mental slavery. It is a truth expressed through the simple phrase, no mud, no lotus. This ancient saying, rooted in Buddhist teachings, tells us something profound. Beauty, growth, and enlightenment are born from struggle, pain, and discomfort. Just as the lotus flower blooms only in muddy water, we too must embrace our challenges if we wish to rise. But how does this destroy mental slavery? Mental slavery is not about physical chains. It's about the belief that we are powerless, that our pain defines us, that we must remain small. A silent prison built from fear, trauma, and inherited lies. But the ancients knew better. They taught that suffering is not the end, but the beginning. They taught that transformation comes through fire, and they left us tools, secrets, not just to endure suffering, but to transcend it. The secret is not escape. The secret is embrace. Secret is to stop running from the mud and instead understand that the mud is where the miracle begins. If you are in pain, if you are lost, if you feel trapped, know this: your lotus is waiting. Your strength is not in avoiding the mud, but in growing through it. You are not broken. You are becoming. So let us remember, no mud, no lotus. Let that be your mantra. Let that be your rebellion. Let that be the key that unlocks your mind from every lie that said you weren't enough. The phrase, no mud, is more than a poetic metaphor. It is a spiritual and psychological truth that encapsulates the essence of human transformation. The lotus, a symbol of purity, wisdom, and rebirth in many Eastern traditions, especially in Buddhism and Hinduism, grows only in murky, muddy water. It does not bloom in clear, pristine environments, but in the thickest, darkest swamps. It is not a flaw of nature. It is a profound lesson encoded in the very design of life. We live in a culture that often glorifies ease and comfort, where pain is seen as something to be avoided at all costs. We're told that happiness is the absence of problems, that success means escaping hardship. But this perspective creates a dangerous illusion, one that makes us believe that suffering is a sign of failure, weakness, or personal defect. In truth, the exact opposite is often the case. The mud is not what prevents the lotus from blooming. It is what makes the bloom possible. In the same way, our struggles, our heartbreaks, losses, traumas, fears, and failures are not stains on our character or obstacles to our growth. They are the soil in which our strength takes root. Every moment of confusion, every setback, every dark night of the soul is the mud that cultivates resilience, compassion, wisdom, and self-awareness. This ancient principle reminds us that growth does not happen in sterile environments. We do not evolve in times of comfort. We evolve when we are tested, when we are forced to confront what we thought we couldn't survive, and yet somehow do. The mud represents everything we wish we could avoid: discomfort, emotional pain, insecurity, shame, and fear. But to reject the mud is to reject the lotus. To deny our suffering is to deny the very vehicle that leads us to awakening. If you've ever been broken open by grief, shattered by disappointment, or weighed down by the burdens of life, you are in the mud. And that means you are in the process of blooming. It may not be visible yet. You may still feel submerged in the darkness. But transformation is already taking place. Like the lotus rises inch by inch through the murky waters toward the light, so too does the human spirit ascend toward truth, purpose, and beauty, if we do not resist the process. To truly understand and live by no mud, no lotus is to reframe how we relate to suffering. It is to say, this pain is not pointless. This darkness is not the end of my story. It is to look at the mud of our lives, the parts we wish to hide, erase, or forget, and recognize them as sacred ground. It is the birthplace of the lotus, and therefore the birthplace of our highest selves. When we think of slavery, we often imagine chains, shackles, and visible confinement. The most dangerous form of slavery is not physical. It is mental. It is the kind that does not confine the body but shackles the mind. Mental slavery is a silent, invisible prison built not from iron bars, but from ideas, conditioning, and fear. And because it is internal, it is often unnoticed, even by the people who are suffering under its weight. This form of slavery manifests when we adopt limiting beliefs that convince us we are powerless. When we internalize the voices of oppression, those that say, "You'll never be good enough," "You're not allowed to question," "Stay in your place," or "Who are you to dream that big?" These ideas don't need to be shouted from outside sources anymore. Eventually, we begin to whisper them to ourselves. Mental slavery is handed down generationally. It is passed from parent to child, culture to individual, often without question. It shows up in self-doubt, in chronic fear of failure, in the need for external validation, and in the quiet resignation to a life that feels small and suffocating. People trapped in mental slavery may look free on the outside. They may have jobs, families, and education, but they live inside invisible boundaries they have been taught never to cross. What makes mental slavery so devastating is that it replaces curiosity with fear, imagination with compliance, confidence with self-censorship. It convinces people to accept pain as normal, to suppress their voices, to believe their dreams are unrealistic or selfish. Over time, it dims the light of who we truly are until we forget that we ever had a light to begin with. This condition is not accidental. Throughout history, oppressive systems have relied on mental control to maintain power long after physical chains have been removed. Colonization, slavery, patriarchy, and classism did not just dominate bodies. They reprogrammed minds, and that programming does not disappear overnight. It lingers in the form of internalized oppression, the belief that one must conform, obey, submit, and settle in order to survive. But once we recognize this invisible prison for what it is, we begin to awaken. We begin to see that our true captivity lies in the belief that we are not free. And from that awareness, change becomes possible. The first step to liberation is not escape, it is recognition. We must see the bars in order to break them. We must name the voices that were never truly ours and choose to speak in our own. The mind is the battlefield. We can reclaim our thoughts, question our assumptions, and challenge the programming that was forced upon us. We begin to dismantle the architecture of mental slavery from within. And once we do that, no one, not even the most powerful system, can ever truly enslave us again. In today's fast-paced, modern world, we often seek solutions in technology, in temporary distractions, in the newest trends or motivational sound bites. But long before we had digital screens and therapy apps, long before self-help became an industry, our ancestors wrestled with the same questions we do. Why do we suffer? What is the purpose of pain? There a path out of suffering that leads not just to relief, but to freedom? The answers to these questions were not ignored. They were studied, meditated upon, and recorded across ancient civilizations, from India and Egypt to China, Greece, and the indigenous wisdom of the Americas. There was a recurring theme: suffering is not an error in the system. It is part of the system, not as punishment, as a process of transformation. In Buddhist teachings, suffering, or dukkha, is acknowledged as a fundamental truth of human existence. The Buddha didn't promise a life without pain. He offered a path that leads beyond the grip of pain through understanding, mindfulness, and compassion. Similarly, in ancient Stoicism, philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius taught that adversity was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as training for the soul. They saw hardship as the forge in which character and wisdom are born. Ancient teachings do not ask us to enjoy suffering, but to respect it, to listen to it, to see it not as a sign that life has gone wrong, as an opportunity to wake up from illusion, especially the illusion that life should always be comfortable or that we are meant to avoid pain at all costs. What the ancients knew and what modern psychology is only beginning to confirm is that suffering can initiate a deep inner awakening if we allow it to. When we are broken open, we are often more receptive to truth. When the structures we built our identities around begin to collapse, we are forced to confront what is real and what is false. And it is in that confrontation that true healing begins. Ancient wisdom does not minimize our pain. It dignifies it. It offers rituals, philosophies, spiritual frameworks, and disciplines not just to endure suffering, but to use it as a vehicle for enlightenment. It teaches that within every trial, a hidden message, a seed of awareness waiting to be nurtured. And that once we learn how to sit with suffering instead of running from it, something incredible happens. It loses its power to control us. Way out is not found by numbing, denying, or bypassing pain. The ancient path leads through the center of it, with courage, with surrender, and with trust that on the other side of that darkness is a deeper light. A light that is not borrowed from the world, but awakened within. These teachings are not relics of the past. They are keys for the present. They remind us that the storm is not the enemy. It is the call to rise. And the suffering you endure may, in fact, be the very invitation to meet your higher self. In every life, pain is inevitable. We encounter it in many forms: loss, rejection, failure, illness, betrayal, uncertainty, and fear. Despite its universal presence, pain is almost always seen as the enemy, something to be suppressed, denied, escaped, or medicated away. We are conditioned from an early age to avoid pain at all costs. But this avoidance, reflexive recoil from discomfort, is not harmless. It is the very mechanism that sustains mental slavery. To be clear, pain hurts. Pain can be overwhelming. But the deeper truth, the one carried by sages, mystics, and wisdom keepers throughout history, is that pain has a purpose. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the messenger, the mirror, the fire that burns away illusion and ego. It is a profound teacher that appears in our lives not to destroy us, but to awaken us. When we treat pain as the enemy, we resist it. We distract ourselves, numb ourselves with addictions or overwork, and seek false comforts that may soothe us temporarily, but deepen our bondage in the long term. Resistance traps us in cycles of denial and dysfunction, creating more suffering than the original wound. As the psychologist Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." Avoiding pain doesn't eliminate it. It simply allows it to take root beneath the surface, where it quietly dictates our behavior, choices, and beliefs. By contrast, when we choose to see pain as a teacher, everything begins to change. We become curious instead of fearful. We ask, what is this pain trying to show me? What part of me is ready to be healed, released, or transformed? That shift from avoidance to inquiry is the beginning of inner liberation. Think of pain as life's way of getting your attention. It's the signal that something within you needs to be faced. Perhaps it's an old story that no longer serves you. Perhaps it's a part of your identity that has grown too small. Perhaps it's a truth you've been avoiding for years. Pain, in this sense, is not a punishment but a compass, pointing you toward the next step in your evolution. Ancient traditions understood this. In rites of passage across cultures, pain was often deliberately included, not as cruelty, but as initiation. Physical challenges, isolation, fasting, and trials were used to mark the transition from one stage of life to another, from innocence to maturity, from ordinary awareness to higher consciousness. Cultures recognize that pain, when approached with reverence and intention, was capable of initiating a spiritual rebirth. The modern world, however, offers no such initiation. It offers comfort, convenience, escape, but no depth, no confrontation, no growth through pain. As a result, we remain mentally enslaved by our fear of suffering. We are taught to cope rather than to transcend. But freedom does not come through avoidance. It comes through transformation. And transformation requires us to stop running and start listening, to lean into the pain and allow it to teach us what nothing else can. Only then can we integrate the lessons it carries. Only then can we reclaim the parts of ourselves that were fragmented in fear. Only then can we begin to live, not just exist. In this way, pain becomes sacred. It becomes a portal, not a prison. And those who have learned from it, those who have sat in the fire and emerged with deeper wisdom, are no longer enslaved by fear. They are free in the most powerful sense, free to feel, free to choose, and free to rise. There is a sacred alchemy that occurs when a human being goes through difficulty with awareness. It is not just about surviving adversity. It is about being changed by it in ways that make us deeper, wiser, and more whole. True transformation does not happen in moments of ease. It is born in moments of pressure, friction, and resistance. Just as fire is necessary to refine gold, hardship is necessary to refine the soul. Is a universal principle woven into the fabric of life. In nature, transformation is never a painless process. The seed must split open and break in order for the plant to grow. Caterpillar must dissolve completely in its cocoon before it can become a butterfly. The forest must sometimes burn for its ecosystem to renew. These processes seem violent, even destructive, but they are necessary for rebirth. In the same way, human beings undergo cycles of destruction and rebirth. The trials we face, the loss of a loved one, the collapse of a relationship, financial devastation, illness, betrayal, inner turmoil, these are not simply unfortunate events. They are spiritual crucibles, sacred fires designed not to destroy us, but to burn away what is no longer real, what is no longer needed, what is no longer aligned with our truest self. Yet in the middle of the trial, it rarely feels sacred. It feels like chaos. It feels like loss. It feels like the end. But that is because we are taught to fear the fire instead of recognizing what it is doing, melting the false self so the true self can emerge. This process is not quick. It is not comfortable, does not come with guarantees or timelines. But if we surrender to it, if we stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin to ask, what is this trying to show me? Then transformation becomes possible. We begin to evolve, not just in what we do, but in who we are. We become stronger not because we've escaped hardship, but because we've endured it consciously. We become wiser not because we've avoided pain, because we've sat with it, questioned it, and allowed it to shape us. The fire tests our values. It reveals our attachments. It shows us where we have been living out of fear instead of truth, exposes what is shallow and invites us to go deeper. Most importantly, it humbles us, because in the fire, the ego has nothing to hold on to. We are stripped bare. And in that sacred vulnerability, we meet ourselves, our real selves, for the first time. Ancient traditions have always honored the fire as a symbol of purification. In Hindu rituals, fire's agate is invoked to cleanse, to offer, to transform. In Christianity, trials are referred to as refiner's fire. In indigenous ceremonies, fire is used to release old identities and call in new beginnings. All of these traditions recognize what modern life often forgets, that transformation is not a soft, gentle breeze. It is a fierce, unrelenting wind that clears everything that cannot stand in truth. So when we are in the trial, when everything around us seems to be falling apart, It is not a sign that we are being punished. It is a sign that something old is dying and something new is preparing to be born. The transformation doesn't just happen after the trial ends. It is happening within it, moment by moment, breath by breath. Who have been through the fire and emerged on the other side are not the same people who entered it. They carry a quiet power, a depth, a stillness that can't be faked. They know what it means to rebuild, to resurrect, to rise. Not because they avoided hardship, but because they walked through it with open eyes and an open heart. We often imagine chains as physical objects, metallic clinking restraints that bind the body. But in the modern world, and even throughout much of history, the most enduring chains have not been forged from iron, but from ideas. Psychological chains are subtle, invisible, and far more difficult to detect or escape. And because they live inside the mind, they shape our reality from within, limiting what we believe is possible, permissible, or even imaginable. These mental chains are built from four powerful and deeply rooted forces: fear, doubt, shame, and inherited narratives. Each of them on its own is potent. Together, they form an internal prison that can last a lifetime, unless we learn to recognize and dismantle them. Fear is the most immediate and primitive chain. It tells us not to try, not to speak, not to step outside the lines. Fear whispers that safety lies in obedience and sameness, that risk equals danger, that rejection is death. Fear paralyzes action and encourages silence. But what we often don't realize is that fear is rarely about external threats. It's about the internal conditioning that has convinced us we are not strong enough to face discomfort or uncertainty. Fear doesn't prevent pain, it prevents growth. Doubt is the chain that attacks identity. It asks, who are you to think you can do this? It undermines self-worth and erodes confidence. It makes us second guess our talents, our intuition, and our voice. Doubt keeps people stuck in cycles of overthinking and inaction. It plants seeds of hesitation that grow into forests of regret. Many people never chase their dreams, not because they lack the ability, but because doubt has told them they are unworthy of the dream. Shame goes even deeper. It's not just about what we do, it's about who we believe we are. Shame says, you are flawed, you are broken, you are not enough. It often comes from childhood wounds, societal conditioning, religious dogma, or past traumas. Shame convinces us that we must hide parts of ourselves in order to be accepted, and in doing so, keeps us from ever being fully seen or truly loved. It is a quiet, corrosive force that eats away at authenticity and replaces it with masks. And then there are the inherited narratives, the cultural, familial, and generational stories that we absorb before we even learn to speak. These are the stories that tell us what is normal, what is allowed, what is expected. They say things like, people like us don't succeed. You have to sacrifice your happiness for duty. Keep your head down, or that's just the way life is. These narratives are passed down through words, behaviors, and unspoken rules. They are rarely questioned because they are deeply embedded in identity. But make no mistake, inherited narratives can be as restrictive as any wall or cage. What makes these psychological chains so powerful is that we often don't know we're wearing them. They become part of how we think, speak, act, and dream. We adjust our lives around them. We build entire realities to avoid triggering them. We confuse them with truth. But the moment we pause to examine them, to question their origins, to challenge their authority, that is the moment they begin to lose power. Every chain begins as a thought. Every prison begins as a belief. And every step toward liberation begins with awareness. True freedom doesn't start by changing the world outside. It starts by confronting the world we've internalized, by identifying the fears, doubts, shames, and old stories that no longer serve us, We reclaim the right to choose who we are and what we become. And in doing so, we begin the sacred work of unlocking the mind from its own bondage. True awakening, the kind that dissolves mental slavery and restores inner sovereignty, does not begin with answers. It begins with questions. Not the kind we're taught to ask in school, not the ones that seek external approval or validation, but deep, unsettling, transformative questions that challenge the very foundation of how we've been conditioned to think, feel, and exist. Self-inquiry is the ancient, powerful act of turning inward and asking, who am I beneath everything I was taught to be? Where did my beliefs come from? Am my fears truly mine, or were they inherited? Why do I crave acceptance? Whose voice do I hear when I doubt myself? These are not casual or comfortable questions. They are revolutionary. They pierce through the layers of societal programming, cultural assumptions, and unconscious patterns that we have unknowingly adopted over years, even generations. Self-inquiry does not hand us neat, tidy answers. It invites us into the raw, often uncomfortable terrain of our own consciousness where freedom is not given, but discovered. Mental slavery thrives in unexamined lives. It persists when we move on autopilot, when we follow scripts without realizing we're reading from them. It survives because we mistake obedience for peace and repetition for truth. But the moment we pause to observe our own minds, to notice our reactions, trace the origins of our thoughts, to ask why, not once but repeatedly, we create space. And in that space, a sacred shift occurs. We begin to separate who we are from who we've been told we are. The ancient wisdom traditions have long upheld self-inquiry as the cornerstone of liberation. In the East, sages like Ramana Maharshi taught the profound power of the question, who am I? Not as a philosophical exercise, as a path to direct realization of the self beyond ego and illusion. In the West, Socrates famously declared that the unexamined life is not worth living, affirming that to live without questioning is to live asleep, even while awake. But self-inquiry requires courage. It means being willing to look at the parts of ourselves we've ignored, denied, or buried. It means confronting internalized fears and inherited shame. It means dismantling the false identities we've constructed to please others or to survive in systems that were never designed for our thriving. And it means risking the discomfort of change in exchange for the truth of who we are. In the process of self-inquiry, we discover that much of what we've accepted as normal is actually conditioning, a collection of messages we've absorbed from family, religion, media, school, and society. Messages like, success means conformity, or emotion is weakness. Your worth depends on productivity. You must earn love. These beliefs are not facts, they are programs. And once we begin to see them as such, we reclaim the power to choose different ones. The beauty of self-inquiry is that it doesn't require outside permission. It doesn't demand credentials, money, or status. It only requires sincerity, a willingness to be still, to listen deeply, and to follow the truth wherever it leads, even when it contradicts everything we've known. This kind of inner work dismantles mental slavery at its root because it returns us to the source of all freedom. When we own awareness, when we become curious about our own minds, when we stop taking every thought at face value, when we treat our inner world not as a fixed identity but as a living question, we begin to wake up. And that awakening is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a devotion, a way of being that honors growth over comfort, truth over illusion, and sovereignty over submission. In a world obsessed with appearances, possessions, and status, easy to believe that freedom is something we achieve out there, a condition based on external achievements, financial independence, or political rights. While those forms of freedom are important and worth striving for, they are fragile and often incomplete. True and lasting freedom does not begin with our circumstances, it begins with our consciousness. Until we are free within, no amount of outer success will liberate us from the invisible chains that bind us. This is a radical idea in modern society, where people often equate liberation with lifestyle. We are told that freedom looks like more money, more options, more control, fewer obligations. But time and again we find people who have everything on the outside: wealth, power, influence, yet live in deep inner torment. They are enslaved to anxiety, insecurity, addiction, perfectionism, and a constant need for validation. Why? Because their inner world remains unexamined and unfree. Mental slavery is not always loud. It often disguises itself as ambition, approval seeking, or even discipline. It whispers, "You are only worthy when you are achieving," or "Don't slow down, keep proving yourself." It's the silent pressure to conform, to perform, to never disappoint. Creates an internal dictatorship where fear and doubt rule the mind, even when the outer life appears successful. That's why the real battlefield is always within. Liberation starts the moment we realize that no external force can imprison us more effectively than our own beliefs. You can live in a free country and still be a captive to your past. You can have all the privileges in the world and still be shackled by fear of judgment or fear of failure. The key is not to reject the world, but to reclaim the inner authority that shapes how we relate to it. Inner freedom is the ability to respond rather than react, to choose peace over drama, to honor your truth even when it goes against the grain. It is the clarity to know what you value, the strength to set boundaries, and the wisdom to detach your self-worth from outcomes. It is not immunity from pain, but immunity from domination, by others, by ego, by habit, or by inherited programming. Spiritual traditions across cultures emphasize this truth. Stoics taught that no one can enslave your mind unless you allow it. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of the inner yogi who remains undisturbed by praise or blame, success or failure. Spoke of the kingdom within, and the Tao Te Ching described the greatest victory as self-mastery. These teachings converge on one essential insight: external conditions may fluctuate, but the seat of true power is always within. When you cultivate inner freedom, your outer reality begins to reflect it. You stop chasing things to feel whole. You stop accepting roles that diminish your light. You begin making decisions not from fear or obligation, but from alignment and inner truth. This shift is not about escaping responsibilities or rejecting the world. It's about engaging with life from a place of sovereignty, not subjugation. Even in the face of oppression or adversity, history has shown that those who are free within cannot be truly conquered. Think of the great visionaries and freedom fighters: Nelson Mandela, Viktor Frankl, Malala Yousafzai, who maintained dignity, purpose, and inner strength in the harshest of conditions. Their circumstances did not define their freedom, their relationship to those circumstances did. They remind us that the human spirit, once awakened, cannot be caged. This is why mental slavery must be addressed before any meaningful external change can last. Revolutions that do not start within are destined to repeat the same cycles of dominance and fear. But when the mind is decolonized, when we uproot the lies and illusions we've internalized, we don't just change our lives, we change how we experience the entire world. In the struggle to break free from mental slavery, one of the most overlooked yet most powerful tools is presence. The ability to fully inhabit the present moment. Not the next moment, not the past, not the imagined future or the constructed memory, but this moment. The now. It is here, in the now, that our power returns to us, undistorted and undiluted. And it is only here that true freedom can be felt, lived, and embodied. The mind, when left untrained, has a natural tendency to drift into time. It replays the past, analyzing old wounds, rehearsing conversations, carrying shame or fueling resentment, or it jumps ahead into the future, projecting worry, fear, fantasies, or endless what-ifs. This constant back and forth movement is not neutral, creates a state of internal noise, fragmentation, and emotional turbulence. It is in this distracted, divided state that mental slavery thrives. Why? Because we are no longer conscious of the present, and the present is the only place where choice, clarity, and healing exist. When we are not present, we operate on autopilot. Old patterns take over. We speak from fear, react from pain, make decisions based on programming rather than awareness. This is how the mind becomes a cage. Not because we lack intelligence, but because we lack presence. Presence disrupts this cycle. It brings us back to awareness. It allows us to witness our thoughts rather than be consumed by them. It creates a gap between stimulus and response, a space where we can breathe, feel, question, and choose. In that space, something miraculous happens. We become the observer instead of the prisoner of our minds. The ancient mystics, sages, and spiritual teachers all spoke of this power. In Zen, it is the state of mindfulness, complete attention to what is. In Christianity, the peace that surpasses understanding. In Sufi teachings, it is the remembrance, the practice of being so present that one becomes aware of the divine in every breath. In Eckhart Tolle's modern teachings, simply the power of now. Despite the language or tradition, the message is the same: freedom lives in presence. To be present is not just a spiritual idea. It is a radical act of liberation. When we become present, we cut the cord to narratives that were never ours. We see our thoughts as just thoughts, not truths. We allow emotions to arise and pass without becoming them. We hear the noise of conditioning, but are no longer ruled by it. Presence gives us back the authority over our own mind, and with it, the authority over our own life. And there's more. Presence is not passive. It is deeply alive. When we are present, we are fully awake to the richness of life, no longer numb, no longer waiting for some future event to make us whole. We begin to notice beauty in small things, feel emotions more deeply, and make decisions with greater integrity. We become more compassionate with ourselves and with others. The quality of our relationships shifts because we are no longer hiding behind projections or past wounds. We are actually here, meeting each other in truth. Mental slavery cannot survive in the now. It relies on mental noise, time-based identity, and unconscious repetition. But presence silences that noise. It reveals that underneath the layers of fear, judgment, and doubt, there is something stable, unshakable, and free: our essence, our awareness, our being. This is why presence is not just a practice. It is a portal, a doorway into the deeper reality that lies beyond mental bondage. As we journey through the process of dismantling mental slavery, one essential truth becomes abundantly clear: compassion is not a luxury, but a necessity. Without it, the road to freedom can become harsh, unforgiving, and ultimately unsustainable. Many of us carry immense inner critics, voices of judgment, blame, and shame that echo loudly whenever we falter or confront uncomfortable truths. These inner voices are often the strongest chains we wear, binding us not only to old conditioning, but also to self-inflicted suffering. Compassion, on the other hand, is the antidote. It is the gentle yet powerful force that allows us to face our shadows without fear, to embrace our imperfections without rejection, and to approach our healing with patience rather than impatience. To truly free the mind from slavery, we must first learn to be kind to ourselves, to recognize that the chains we carry were never our fault alone. They are the product of complex histories, collective wounds, and deep-seated fears passed down through generations. When we extend compassion inward, we create a safe container where healing can unfold naturally. This kindness softens the harsh judgments that keep us stuck and allows us to meet our pain with understanding rather than resistance. Instead of battling our weaknesses or mistakes, we begin to see them as part of the human experience, a natural part of growth and transformation. Moreover, compassion extends beyond ourselves. It is through the lens of empathy and kindness that we come to understand the mental slavery experienced by others. When we recognize that every person is fighting unseen battles shaped by their own fears, doubts, and inherited narratives, we cultivate a sense of solidarity rather than division. This awareness fosters deeper connection and breaks down the illusion of separation, the very illusion that often fuels mental bondage. True liberation is not a solitary achievement, but a collective evolution. As we heal our own minds with compassion, we become beacons of freedom for those around us. Our ability to respond with patience rather than anger, forgiveness rather than resentment, and understanding rather than judgment helps to dismantle the societal chains that perpetuate mental slavery on a larger scale. Principle is deeply rooted in ancient wisdom traditions as well as modern psychology. Buddhist teachings emphasize metta, or loving kindness meditation, as a foundational practice for cultivating compassion for oneself and all beings. Christian ethics, compassion is central to the message of grace and redemption. Even secular psychology highlights self-compassion as a critical factor in resilience and emotional healing. Furthermore, compassion transforms how we relate to failure and setbacks. Mental slavery often manifests as a harsh internal dictatorship that demands perfection and punishes any sign of weakness. Compassion breaks this cycle by allowing us to accept failure as a necessary part of learning and growth. It invites us to be patient with ourselves when the old habits resurface, reminding us that transformation is not linear but a process of unfolding. In practical terms, cultivating compassion can involve simple daily practices such as mindful breathing, self-affirmations, journaling about our feelings without judgment, or extending forgiveness to ourselves and others. Over time, these practices build a foundation of kindness that strengthens our resilience and softens the grip of mental slavery. In the end, compassion becomes the soil in which freedom takes root. Without it, our efforts to break free risk becoming battles fought with exhaustion and self-recrimination. With it, liberation is transformed from a distant goal into a lived experience, one where we walk gently with ourselves and others through the mud, knowing that from this very mud, the lotus blooms. In closing, remember this ancient secret: no mud, no lotus. Without the mud, without the struggle, the pain, the mental chains, we would never experience the beauty of true freedom and awakening. Our challenges are not obstacles, but the very soil that nourishes our growth. Mental slavery is real, but it is not invincible. With courage, self-inquiry, presence, and above all, compassion, we can break free from the invisible chains that have bound us for so long. So let us embrace the mud of our lives, not as a burden, but as a sacred path leading to the radiant lotus of liberation. Let us reclaim our minds, not through force or denial, but through understanding and kindness. And let us walk forward together, empowered by the timeless wisdom that within every struggle lies the seed of profound transformation. Thank you.